The first time I saw Mrs. Thornton's face on my security camera footage, I thought it was some kind of bizarre mistake. There she was, in the dead of night, crouched behind my bushes, scribbling notes furiously on a clipboard like a detective solving the case of the century. Her silver hair was frizzed from the humidity, her binoculars hung from her neck, and her beady eyes darted from my window to my lawn like she was surveying a crime scene. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I had imagined it, but no. When I rewound the footage, there she was again, standing on her tiptoes, trying to peek into my backyard. At that moment, I realized two things. 1, my new neighbor was insane, and 2, I had just declared war on the most powerful woman in this neighborhood, the almighty HOA president. When Lisa and I moved into our new home, I had no idea that our biggest problem wouldn't be mortgage payments, nosy neighbors, or even unexpected plumbing disasters. No, our biggest problem was a 70-year-old woman with a vendetta against anything that didn't fit her idea of perfection. The first time I met her, she didn't introduce herself with a polite handshake or a plate of cookies like normal neighbors. Instead, she appeared on my doorstep with a folder full of HOA guidelines and a grim expression, like a lawyer about to deliver bad news. "Mr. Peterson," she said, peering at me over her glasses. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I am Mrs. Thornton, president of the Homeowners Association. Our community prides itself on order, structure, and mutual respect." "Oh, nice to meet you," I said, reaching out my hand, which she ignored. Instead, she shoved a printed booklet into my chest. "I suggest you familiarize yourself with our rules. We have very high standards here, and I expect you to uphold them." Lisa, who had been standing behind me, gave me a subtle warning look, the kind that said, "Don't start trouble." But trouble had already started the moment I met this woman. I had barely unpacked my boxes, and she was already treating me like a delinquent who had just moved into her precious kingdom. I glanced down at the booklet, flipping through it. The rules were absurd. Grass had to be trimmed to an exact height. Trash cans could only be placed on the curb between precisely 7 a.m. and 7:15 a.m. And, most importantly, no unauthorized modifications to property, whatever that meant. I chuckled, closing the booklet. "Wow, you guys really take this seriously, huh?" Mrs. Thornton's face remained stone-cold. "We do. That's why this is one of the most well-maintained communities in the city." Lisa nudged me before I could say something sarcastic, so I forced a polite nod and said, "Well, thanks for the, welcome." The moment she left, Lisa sighed. "Jack, please don't pick a fight with her." "Pick a fight? I haven't even done anything yet." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Yet." I should have listened to her. 2 days later, I found my first HOA violation notice in the mailbox. Official HOA violation notice. Violation: dog barking, excessive noise disturbance. Date: Tuesday, 2:07 p.m. Fine, $50. I stared at the paper in disbelief. My dog, Buddy, a lovable golden retriever, had barked exactly once at the mailman that afternoon. That was it. But somehow, Mrs. Thornton had documented the exact time down to the minute. Either she was psychic or she was watching us. "That's crazy," Lisa said when I showed her the notice. "No, she's crazy," I corrected. "How does she even know when he barked? Is she standing outside our house with a stopwatch?" Lisa bit her lip, thinking. "You don't think she has cameras set up, do you?" That thought chilled me. If she had cameras spying on us, we needed proof. That night, I did something I had been meaning to do anyway. I installed security cameras around our house, not just to keep my home safe, but to figure out exactly how Mrs. Thornton was monitoring us. It didn't take long to get my answer. The next morning, I checked the footage. There she was, right outside my property line, peeking over my fence. I nearly spit out my coffee. Lisa, watching over my shoulder, gasped, "Oh my God." I rewound the footage. There she was again, at a different time, staring at my lawn and taking notes on a clipboard. "This woman is unhinged," I muttered. Lisa's eyes widened. "Do you think she does this to everyone?" That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with a nosy neighbor. I was dealing with a full-blown neighborhood dictator. And she had just made me her latest target. That evening, as I was taking out the trash, I heard a rustling sound in my bushes. I froze. Then I heard it again. I whipped around, and there, half hidden behind my hedge, was Mrs. Thornton herself. She gasped when she saw me, then straightened up as if nothing had happened. "Oh, Mr. Peterson. I was just checking on a rare neighborhood squirrel that's been causing disturbances." "A squirrel," I repeated. "Yes, it's been seen darting through various properties, and we have to ensure it isn't damaging community flora." I looked at the notepad in her hands. And does this squirrel's activity require note-taking?" She quickly tucked the notepad under her arm. "I take my responsibilities very seriously, Mr. Peterson. Now, if you'll excuse me." She turned and power-walked away like a guilty child caught stealing candy. I stood there in shock. This woman was actually spying on my house. The next morning, I found another violation notice in my mailbox. This time, it was for unauthorized security cameras. Apparently, my cameras disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. I marched straight to her house. She opened the door with a smug smile. "Ah, Mr. Peterson. I assume you've read the notice. You're banning my security cameras while you're out here playing neighborhood CIA?" I said, waving the paper. She pursed her lips. "The HOA rules clearly state that any external modifications must be approved. Your cameras were not. But you can stand outside my house with binoculars like some kind of suburban James Bond?" She crossed her arms. "I oversee the community to ensure order is maintained. That's literally what my cameras are doing. I'm afraid the rules are the rules, Mr. Peterson." I clenched my jaw, realizing something. She wasn't just spying on me. She was trying to control me. I grinned. "Well, Mrs. Thornton, let's see what happens when we put your rules to the test." I had no idea that this was the beginning of the biggest war this neighborhood had ever seen. The Homeowners Association meeting was held in a bland, overly air-conditioned community center, the kind of place where important discussions about property lines and shrub height were treated with the seriousness of a Supreme Court hearing. I walked in with my violation notice in hand, determined to expose Mrs. Thornton's hypocrisy. The moment I entered, I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me. Some were sympathetic, some were wary, but most carried a knowing look. One that said they had been in my position before. Mrs. Thornton sat at the front of the room like a judge about to deliver sentencing. She had a gavel, an actual wooden gavel, which she tapped on the table to silence the small murmurs among the residents. "Order," she announced, as if she were presiding over a courtroom instead of a group of people who just wanted to live in peace. "We have several important matters to address today, but first, I understand Mr. Peterson has some concerns regarding his recent violation notice." I walked up to the front, cleared my throat, and turned to face the room. "Yeah, I have a few concerns. Specifically, I'd like to know why my security cameras are considered an unauthorized modification when Mrs. Thornton herself has been seen peering over my fence with binoculars and taking notes like she's building a case against my front lawn." A ripple of muffled laughter spread across the room. Mrs. Thornton's face remained composed, but I noticed the twitch in her jaw, a sign that I was getting under her skin. "That is a gross misrepresentation of my role in this community," she said, straightening her spine. "I oversee neighborhood compliance to maintain the integrity of our standards." I raised an eyebrow. "So you can spy on people, but we can't use cameras to protect our own homes?" "This is not about me, Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice tight. "It is about you violating HOA guidelines. Security cameras must be approved by the board before installation." I held up my violation notice. "And let me guess, who's on this board?" A man in the back raised his hand hesitantly. "Well, Mrs. Thornton appoints the board members." I turned back to her with a smirk. "So you make the rules, enforce the rules, and appoint the people who back you up? Sounds fair." Several neighbors exchanged glances. A few even nodded. Mrs. Thornton gave the room a tight smile. Our system has worked perfectly fine for years. If you had followed the correct procedures, you wouldn't be in this situation. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself not to lose my temper. All right. Let's assume I take down my cameras. What's stopping you from continuing to snoop around my property? Because from what I've seen, you've got more surveillance going on than my entire security system combined. She sat back, crossing her arms. Mr. Peterson, do you have proof of these accusations? I grinned. Funny you should ask. I pulled out my phone and played the security footage. The grainy black and white clip showed Mrs. Thornton crouched near my fence, scribbling furiously. The timestamp proved she had been there in the early hours of the morning, which made her excuse about community oversight even weaker. The room erupted. A woman gasped. Someone in the back muttered, "I knew it." Another neighbor shook his head and whispered, "I caught her near my backyard once too." Mrs. Thornton's face remained impassive, but I could see the fire in her eyes. She was calculating her next move. "This is a distortion of reality," she said finally, voice even. "I was simply ensuring that all properties were maintaining the proper distance regulations." I gestured toward the screen. "At 5 in the morning? In my backyard?" With a notepad. She picked up her gavel and tapped it against the table. "This meeting is not about personal disputes. It is about the integrity of our community." A man near the front, Mr. Garcia, who had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade, spoke up. "Actually, it sounds like it's about your integrity, Mrs. Thornton." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. That's when I realized something. This wasn't just about me. Mrs. Thornton had been terrorizing this neighborhood for years, and people were just waiting for the right moment to fight back. I decided to push it further. Since we're talking about integrity, I'd like to bring something else to everyone's attention. I pulled out another piece of paper, one that Mr. Garcia had given me earlier. This is a list of every home in the neighborhood, with detailed notes about each resident. Notes that Mrs. Thornton has personally written. A collective gasp filled the room. I started reading. House on Maple Street, porch light left on too long last Tuesday. Mr. Howard's front yard, grass slightly uneven. Mrs. Connor's dog walked 30 seconds past curfew. Mrs. Connors, an elderly woman near the front, threw up her hands. "That's ridiculous. You mean to tell me she's been timing my dog walks?" "She's been watching all of us," I said, "taking notes on every little thing." "Who approved that, Mrs. Thornton?" For the first time, she looked genuinely unsettled. "This is a necessary part of maintaining standards. If we allow chaos, the neighborhood will decline." Mr. Garcia crossed his arms. "Or maybe you just like controlling people." She straightened, clearly trying to regain her composure. "I have only ever acted in the best interest of this community." "Then why do so many of us feel like we're living under surveillance?" I countered. Another neighbor chimed in. "Yeah, I got a fine for wind chimes being too loud last summer." "Who even enforces that?" A man near the back added. "She fined me for excessive Halloween decorations. It was 2 pumpkins and a plastic skeleton." The meeting erupted into chaos. People started airing their grievances, listing off fines and absurd rules they had put up with for years. It was like a dam had broken, and all the bottled-up resentment was spilling out. Mrs. Thornton's once loyal subjects were turning on her. She banged her gavel again, her voice strained. "Order! We must maintain order!" But no one was listening anymore. The tide had turned. Mr. Garcia leaned toward me. "I think you just started a revolution." I grinned. "Good." Mrs. Thornton stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This meeting is over." She stormed out, her usual composed demeanor cracking under the weight of an entire community waking up to her nonsense. As I watched her leave, I knew this wasn't over. She wasn't the type to go down without a fight. But now, neither was I. The morning after the meeting, the neighborhood felt different. There was a buzz in the air, a shift in energy, like the aftermath of a long-overdue rebellion. For the first time since we moved in, people waved at me as I walked Buddy down the street. A few neighbors even stopped to chat, which was a drastic change from the usual stiff nods and quick door closings whenever Mrs. Thornton was around. Lisa met me at the front door as I came back from the walk. She had her phone in her hand, her eyes wide. "You need to see this," she said, handing it to me. The neighborhood group chat was on fire. Messages were pouring in non-stop, all of them about the meeting. People were sharing their own horror stories, posting pictures of ridiculous violation notices, and even circulating the footage of Mrs. Thornton sneaking around properties in the early morning. Someone had turned the footage into a meme, with the caption, "Neighborhood Watch or CIA? You decide." Lisa grinned. "You've started something big." I scrolled through the chat, shaking my head. This woman has been terrorizing people for years. How did no one fight back before? Because she made sure to keep people isolated, Lisa said. Everyone thought they were the only ones dealing with her nonsense. Now that they know they're not alone, they're angry. Angry might have been an understatement. A new message popped up in the chat from Mr. Garcia. Emergency HOA meeting. We need to vote her out. This ends today. By the time Lisa and I arrived at the meeting later that evening, the community center was packed. The usual HOA meetings had a handful of people at best, but tonight, it seemed like every homeowner in the neighborhood had shown up. There was an undeniable tension in the air, the kind that signaled something big was about to happen. Mrs. Thornton was already seated at the front, her usual gavel in hand, her expression a mixture of defiance and barely concealed panic. She had clearly lost control, and she knew it. The moment the meeting started, Mr. Garcia stood up. "We've had enough," he said firmly. "This neighborhood isn't a dictatorship, and it's time for change. I'm calling for a vote to remove Mrs. Thornton as HOA president." The room erupted in agreement. People nodded, some even clapped. But Mrs. Thornton wasn't going down without a fight. "You can't do that," she snapped, her voice sharper than usual. "I was elected by this community." "By who?" I countered. "The board you appointed?" Her jaw tightened. "I have dedicated years to maintaining order here. Without structure, this neighborhood will fall apart." "Or maybe," I said, "people will finally be able to live without feeling like they're being watched every second of the day." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. But then, Mrs. Thornton did something unexpected. She smirked. "You really think you can just vote me out?" she said. "You have no idea how deep this goes." She reached into her folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "If I go down, I'm taking the whole board with me." The room fell silent. "What are you talking about?" One of the board members, a nervous-looking man named Roger, asked. She placed the papers in front of her. "I have records of every HOA board member's violations that have been conveniently overlooked. Roger, you've failed to pay your HOA fees for 3 years. Linda, your home technically violates setback regulations, but I've let it slide. Carl, you've been approving your own landscaping projects without proper permit. If you remove me, I'll expose every single one of you." A ripple of unease spread through the board members. They shifted uncomfortably, exchanging nervous glances. I stood up, shaking my head. "So that's it? You blackmailed your own board into letting you do whatever you wanted." She shrugged. "That's how you maintain power." For a moment, it seemed like she had won. The board members hesitated, clearly afraid of what she might do if they turned against her. But then, to my surprise, Roger let out a long sigh and sat back in his chair. "You know what?" he said. "I don't even care anymore." Everyone turned to look at him. "I joined this board because I thought it would be a simple job, maybe a way to help the neighborhood," he continued. "Instead, I've spent years covering for you, following ridiculous rules, and pretending everything was fine. If you want to expose me, go ahead. At this point, I'd rather take the hit than keep playing along." Linda nodded. "Same here." Carl muttered something under his breath before tossing his name tag onto the table. I quit. One by one, the board members stood down. The power Mrs. Thornton had spent years hoarding was slipping through her fingers. Her smirk faltered. You're making a mistake, she said through gritted teeth. No, I said, stepping forward. The mistake was letting you run this place like your personal kingdom for so long. A voice from the back of the room spoke up. Let's vote. The vote was swift and brutal. The entire room, minus Mrs. Thornton herself, voted in favor of removing her as HOA president. When the final count was announced, she sat motionless, gripping the edges of the table like she was trying to keep herself anchored. It was over. The moment the meeting ended, people practically celebrated. A group of neighbors started discussing electing a new board, this time with real input from the community. Others talked about changing some of the more absurd HOA rules, like the no pink flowers policy that had somehow been enforced for years. Mrs. Thornton, meanwhile, gathered her things with mechanical precision. Before she could leave, I walked up to her. You know, I said, you could have just been a normal neighbor. People might have actually liked you. She looked at me for a long moment, then, without a word, walked out the door. The weeks that followed were some of the most peaceful since we moved in. The new HOA board was made up of reasonable people, and for the first time, it felt like a real community instead of a surveillance state. I even caught Buddy digging in the backyard one day without immediately worrying about a fine. Everything seemed to settle into place. That is, until one afternoon when Lisa came running into the house, her phone in her hand. You are not going to believe this, she said. I glanced up from my laptop. What? She turned the screen toward me, showing a post from the city's official website. There, in bold letters, was a campaign announcement. Mrs. Thornton was running for mayor. I stared at the screen, my stomach sinking. You have got to be kidding me. Lisa shook her head. She's like a villain in a horror movie. You think she's gone, but she always comes back. I groaned, rubbing my temples. Well, this should be fun. Lisa sat down beside me, grinning. At least you've had practice fighting her. I laughed, but a part of me knew this wasn't over. If Mrs. Thornton wanted power, she was going to find a way to get it. And somehow, I had a feeling that our battle was just getting started.